Here we have some of the apps by Food Cloud Plus available on Microsoft App Source, and today we'll be discussing some of the functionalities of the Inventory Shelf Life app. Inventory Shelf Life has two core functionalities, sales and purchasing. In this video, we'll be going over its applications for purchasing. Its applications for sales are covered in another video. We'll go through an overview of what Inventory Shelf Life is, how to set it up, and how the Inventory Shelf Life app works in Business Central. While purchasing items from vendors, food companies must consider and communicate their shelf life requirements to their vendors. This is to avoid inadequate products, customer dissatisfaction, returns, and lost sales and payments. Food companies must ensure that the items they receive from vendors meet their internal shelf life requirements. The Food Cloud Plus Inventory Shelf Life app restricts the receiving of items for which the expiration date minus the receipt date is less than the required shelf life. This ensures that inbound products being received from vendors will not expire for a defined number of days. This means that food companies can keep such items on their shelves without having them expire for a certain period of time. Inventory shelf life can be used for purchase orders as well as warehouse receipts. Users can create and assign shelf life codes that represent their agreed upon shelf life requirements. These codes can be created based on the item, the vendor, or a combination of the two. Here we have a diagram showing the calculation of inventory shelf life. It ensures items are received on a date that is at least the number of required shelf life days before the item expires. If the item is received on a date that is less than the number of shelf life days away from the item's expiration date, that item will be restricted from being received. Before we can use the inventory shelf life functionality, we must complete the following. We must complete our inventory shelf life setup, create shelf life codes, and assign shelf life codes to vendors, items, or combinations of the two. To complete our inventory shelf life setup, we're going to go to the inventory shelf life setup page. And the field we'll be focusing on more for the purchasing side of inventory shelf life is the post-receipt calculation date field on the right. The other two fields on the left are more so pertinent for the sales side of inventory shelf life. The post-receipt calculation date specifies the date to use when posting a receipt along with the shelf life days to determine the minimum expiration date of the inventory that will be allowed to be received. We have two options for this field, the posting date and the work date. The posting date is usually the date that the call is shipped, whereas the work date is usually the date set as the work date in the system by the user. For the purposes of this demonstration, we'll be using the posting date as our post-receipt calculation date. Now that we've completed our setup, we can take a look at shelf life codes. We're going to go to the shelf life codes page, and here we have some codes preset. To create a new code, we'd click on New, and we'd fill in the fields as necessary. For example, I can make a shelf life code for 40 days. And the shelf life days field will enter the numeric value of the code, which in this case is 40 days. Now that we've created our codes, we can assign them to different items, vendors, or combinations of the two. For example, if I wanted to assign a code to an item, I would open up the item card. And in the Inventory Fast tab, we can see there's a field for shelf life code. Here we have the 15-day shelf life code attached to the item sausage. This means that no matter the purchase order, all purchase orders with the item sausage are subject to a 15-day shelf life requirement for that quantity of sausage. A similar process can be used for vendors. If we open up the vendor card, for example, meat producer, if we scroll down to the Receiving Fast tab, we can see there's a field for shelf life code. Here I've assigned the 20-day shelf life requirement code for the vendor meat producer. This means that no matter the item, all purchase orders from the vendor meat producer are subject to a 20-day shelf life requirement. To attach a code to a combination of item vendor, we would once again open up the item card. Here, for example, again, sausage. And we click on Related, Purchases, Vendor Shelf Life Codes. In the vendor number field, we'll enter the vendor number we want this combination to apply to, and the shelf life codes field will enter the shelf life code that we want to enforce. In addition, if our items have variant items, we can also include variant codes. That way the requirement will apply to variant items as well. So we can see here that our vendor number is vendor 91,000, which is meat producer, and the shelf life code is the 30-day shelf life requirement. This means that for purchase orders from the vendor meat producer and for the item sausage specifically, they are subject to a 30-day shelf life requirement. Now that we've completed our setup requirement, we can take a look at how the Inventory Shelf Life app works in Business Central through a scenario. Let's assume we have a purchase order for 100 cases of the item sausage from the vendor meat producer. Our post-receipt calculation date is set to posting date, and our code setup is as follows. For the item sausage, we have a 20-day shelf life requirement. For the vendor meat producer, we have a 15-day shelf life requirement. And for the combination of the item sausage to the vendor meat producer, we have a 30-day shelf life requirement. We'll consider two scenarios. One where our posting date is set to September 15, and another where our posting date is set to August 15. However, in both of these scenarios, the expiration date for this quantity of sausage will be September 30th. So we'll open up our purchase order. And here we have a purchase order for the vendor meat producer for 100 cases of the item sausage. If we scroll all the way to the right, we can see that the 30-day shelf life requirement code, SL30D, has automatically been applied. This code was assigned to the combination of the item sausage to the vendor meat producer. In addition, this location ALP, requires warehouse receipts. So we're going to create a warehouse receipt. Now from here, we'll change our posting date to match our first scenario, which is September 15, and we'll complete our item tracking. Once again, our expiration date for this quantity of sausage is September 30th. Now from here, if we were to try to post, we'll get a notification saying that 0 of the total 1 documents have been posted. And if we click on preview posting, we can get more information as to why. Of course, here we get the error message saying that the shelf life requirements for this item have not been met. This is of course because our posting date is set to September 15, while the expiration date is September 30th. We have a 30-day shelf life requirement, but there are less than 30 days from the posting date to the expiration date. There are only 15 days in this scenario. Now instead, if we were to change our posting date to our second scenario, which is August 15, in this scenario with the same item tracking, if we were to post, we can see that the document is posted correctly. And once again, back to our purchase order, we can invoice. And our invoice is completed. If we open up the posted purchase invoice, we can see that the quantity of 100 cases of this item sausage have been purchased. This is of course because in this scenario, our posting date was set to August 15, which is actually greater than the 30-day requirement until the expiration date. The Inventory Shelf Life app by Food Cloud Plus allows users to restrict the receiving of items from vendors, ensure that items being received from vendors comply with the agreed upon shelf life requirements.